Commander Vex'ara stood before the massive observation deck, her 4 arms crossed in what humans might call skepticism. The latest batch of species representatives had just been incinerated, dissolved, or simply vanished into cosmic dust. Another day, another disappointment in the grand testing facility of Sector 9. Well, that was entertaining, she muttered, watching the automated cleanup system scrub away what remained of the Krillian delegation. How many does that make it now, PS? Her communications officer, a spider-like creature named Thrix, tapped his console with one of his 8 legs. 73 species. Commander. All failed within the first phase of the Crucible Protocol. Vex'ara let out a sound that resembled a deflating balloon mixed with a dying space whale. The Crucible Protocol wasn't just any test, it was the test. The one designed by the Galactic Council to find a species worthy of joining the Inner Circle. The one that had been running for over 2 centuries without a single success. Remind me again why we keep doing this, she asked, her mandibles clicking in annoyance. Because, Commander, the Council believes there must be someone out there capable of surviving the trials, someone who can think beyond conventional wisdom and adapt when faced with impossible odds. Right, Vex'ara said, her tone dripping with sarcasm, because that's worked out so well for us. Tell me, Thrix, what's the definition of insanity again? Before Thrix could answer, their conversation was interrupted by a loud ping from the communication array. A new signal was incoming from the Outer Rim territories. Oh, for the love of dark matter, Vex'ara groaned. Don't tell me we have another eager species wanting to prove themselves. Thrix's multiple eyes focused on his screen. Actually, Commander, this one is different. They call themselves humans, and they're from a planet called Earth, bird rock from a yellow star, if you can believe that primitive setup. Humans? Vex'ara repeated, the word feeling strange on her vocal cords. Never heard of them. What makes them think they can succeed where the mighty Zephyrians failed, or the technologically advanced Quantum Collective? According to their transmission, they've been monitoring our test broadcast for the past 50 years. They say, and I quote, "We'd like to give it a shot," end quote. Vex'ara stared at Thrix for a long moment. That's it? That's their entire application? No detailed battle records, no technological demonstrations, no proof of superiority over other species. That appears to be correct, Commander. Well, she said, settling into her command chair with a sound like creaking metal. This should be amusing. At least when they fail spectacularly, it'll be quick. Schedule them for tomorrow's slot. I need the entertainment. 24 hours later, Vex'ara found herself back at the observation deck, this time with a cup of her favorite stimulant beverage and a bag of what humans might recognize as the galactic equivalent of popcorn. Word had spread throughout the facility about the new test subjects, and the viewing area was packed with off-duty personnel. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted life forms, she announced to the crowd, prepare yourselves for what is likely to be the shortest test in Crucible Protocol history. Our subjects today are from a species so unremarkable that they actually requested to participate via what I can only describe as a polite email. Laughter rippled through the assembled aliens, a sound like wind chimes in a tornado. The massive screen flickered to life, showing the approach corridor where test subjects typically arrived. Instead of the usual military procession or ceremonial parade, a single, small vessel approached. It looked like someone had welded together spare parts from a junkyard and somehow convinced them to fly. Is that their flagship? Asked Lieutenant Zix, a crystalline being whose voice sounded like breaking glass. I believe so, Vex'ara replied, barely containing her amusement. It appears to be held together with what their databases call duct tape and sheer optimism. The vessel docked with their facility with all the grace of a drunk asteroid. When the airlock finally opened, instead of a delegation of warriors or scholars, a single figure stepped through. He was ordinary. Disappointingly so. About 6 feet tall, bipedal, with only 2 arms and what appeared to be a covering of some kind of fabric. His skin was a pale pinkish color, and he had hair on the top of his head that looked like it hadn't seen a proper grooming tool in weeks. Greetings, the figure said, his voice carrying through the translation systems with a casual tone that suggested he was meeting friends for lunch rather than facing a test that had killed thousands. "I'm Marcus Webb. I'm here for the thing." Vex'ara blinked all four of her eyes in sequence. "The thing?" "Yeah, Marcus said, gesturing vaguely with one hand while the other remained in his pocket. "The test thing, the one where nobody survives. Figured I'd take a crack at it." The silence in the observation deck was so complete that Vex'ara could hear Thrix's breathing apparatus cycling through its rhythm. Marcus looked around the sterile entry chamber, then back at the cameras he somehow seemed to know were there. "So, where do I start? Is there like a registration desk or something? Maybe a pamphlet explaining the rules?" "This is Commander Vex'ara," she said through the communication system, her voice carefully controlled. "You are about to face the Crucible Protocol, a series of trials designed to test the limits of intelligence, adaptability, and survival instinct. No species has ever survived the complete sequence." "Huh," Marcus said, nodding as if she'd just told him the weather forecast. "Sounds challenging." "I like challenges." He paused, then added with what might have been a grin, "Though I gotta say, your success rate could use some work." A collective gasp went through the observation deck. Several species had declared war over less insulting comments. Vex'ara felt her mandibles twitch. "Are you mocking the integrity of our testing protocols?" "Not mocking," Marcus replied, shrugging off what appeared to be some kind of outer garment and hanging it on a nearby protrusion. "It's just making an observation. In my line of work, if something fails 73 times in a row, we usually figure we're doing something wrong." "And what exactly is your line of work?" Vex'ara asked, genuinely curious despite herself. "I fix things that are broken," Marcus said simply. "Machines, systems, problems that everybody else has given up on. It's what humans do." "You fix things," she repeated flatly. "Among other things, yeah. We're pretty good at looking at impossible situations and finding the angle nobody else thought of." He glanced around the chamber again. "So, about that test?" Vex'ara looked at her assembled staff, all of whom were staring at the screens with expressions ranging from disbelief to morbid fascination. This was either going to be the fastest failure in protocol history, or, well, she couldn't think of an or. There was no way this unremarkable creature from an unremarkable planet could succeed where the greatest minds in the galaxy had failed. "Very well," she said, activating the first phase sequence. The Crucible Protocol consists of 7 phases, each designed to test different aspects of survival and problem-solving. The first phase is known as the Chamber of Infinite Calculations. You will be presented with mathematical problems of increasing complexity. The chamber will begin filling with neurotoxic gas. Solve the equations before the gas reaches lethal concentration, and you advance. And I die horribly," Marcus finished. "Yeah, I got that part. Question though, how long do I have?" "Previous subjects have lasted anywhere from 30 seconds to 4 minutes, Vex'ara said. The record holder was a collective consciousness from the Andromeda spiral. 4 minutes, huh? Marcus said, walking toward the chamber entrance as it opened with a hiss of hydraulic systems. "I bet I can beat that." "Beat the record or beat the test?" Lieutenant Zex asked. Marcus paused at the threshold and looked back at the cameras with what was definitely a grin. "Yes." The door sealed behind him with a sound like a tomb closing. Vex'ara activated the observation protocols and settled in to watch another species add themselves to the casualty list. The Chamber of Infinite Calculations materialized around Marcus, its walls covered in holographic displays showing complex mathematical equations that would challenge even the most advanced quantum computers. "Timer starts now," she announced. The equations appeared, starting simple and rapidly increasing in complexity. Quadratic functions gave way to multidimensional calculus, which evolved into theoretical mathematics that dealt with concepts most species hadn't even discovered yet. Marcus looked at the first equation for exactly 2 seconds, then walked to the wall and began writing, not calculating, not computing, but physically writing on the holographic surface with his finger. What is he doing? Thrix asked, leaning forward on his console. He's not solving the equations, Lieutenant Zix observed. He's changing them. Vex'ara watched in growing confusion as Marcus methodically moved from equation to equation, not solving them but somehow modifying their parameters. The chamber's gas vents activated right on schedule, beginning to fill the space with the pale green mist that had ended so many lives. Marcus glanced at the approaching gas, made what looked like a note on the wall, then continued his work. Commander, Thrix said, his voice tight with something that might have been excitement or terror, the equations, they're interconnected. He's not solving them individually. He's treating the entire sequence as a single, massive problem. That's impossible, Vex'ara said. The equations are designed to be independent variables. There's no connection between them. On the screen, Marcus had reached the final equation in the sequence. Instead of the impossibly complex formula that should have been there, the display now showed a simple addition problem, 2-2. He wrote 4 next to it and stepped back. Every equation in the chamber turned green, indicating completion. The gas vents shut off. The exit door opened. Marcus retrieved his jacket from where he'd left it and walked toward the exit, pausing only to look up at the cameras again. You know, he said conversationally, that wasn't really a math test. It was a pattern recognition test. The equations weren't actually random. They were a sequence designed to build on each other. Once I figured out the underlying pattern, the whole thing became pretty straightforward. He disappeared through the exit, leaving behind a chamber full of solved equations and an observation deck full of very quiet aliens. Vex'ara stared at the screen for a long moment, then slowly turned to face her staff. Did he just? Yes, Commander, Thrix said quietly. He just solved the chamber of infinite calculations in 3 minutes and 47 seconds, and he made it look easy. But that's, she started, then stopped. That's impossible. The equations are generated by our most advanced computational systems. They're designed to be unsolvable within the time limit, apparently, Lieutenant Zix said. His voice filled with something approaching awe. Someone forgot to tell the human. Vex'ara looked back at the screen, where Marcus was presumably making his way to the second phase chamber. For the first time in over 2 centuries of testing, the Crucible protocol had a survivor moving to phase 2, and he was whistling. Well, she said finally, settling back into her chair and taking a long drink of her stimulant beverage, this is either going to be very interesting or very short. Which are you hoping for, Commander? Thrix asked. Vex'ara considered the question as she watched Marcus's progress on the facility monitors. The human was examining the corridor walls with the casual interest of a tourist, occasionally stopping to look more closely at something that caught his attention. You know what, Thrix? She said. For the first time in my career, I genuinely don't know, and that might be the most terrifying thing of all. The facility's emergency klaxons had never been designed to handle what was happening in Phase 2. Marcus Webb stood in the center of what the facility proudly called the Maze of Eternal Torment, and he was decorating. Commander, Thrix's voice cracked through his translation unit. He's not following the maze. Vex'ara pressed her face against the observation window, all 4 eyes straining to process what she was seeing. The maze was a 3-dimensional nightmare of shifting walls, deadly traps, and psychological warfare designed to break the strongest minds. Subjects were supposed to navigate through it, solving puzzles and avoiding death at every turn. Marcus had taken one look at the entrance, walked to the nearest wall, and punched a hole through it. Is he making his own path? Lieutenant Zix asked, his crystalline structure flickering with disbelief. That's against the rules. Ops Officer Clint protested from his station. The maze has specific parameters. You can't just ignore the structure. Someone should probably tell him that, Vex'ara muttered, watching Marcus casually step through his improvised doorway. Through the communication system, they could hear him talking to himself as he walked. Okay, so they want me to spend hours wandering around in here, getting progressively more frustrated and scared. Classic psychological manipulation. Problem is, they're thinking like people who follow rules. He stopped at another wall, examined it for a moment, then kicked it. The advanced alien construction crumbled like cardboard. The thing about humans, Marcus continued, apparently addressing the cameras he kept spotting, is that we're really good at changing the game when the game doesn't make sense. Alarms started blaring throughout the observation deck. The maze's structural integrity warnings were lighting up like a festival display. "Commander," Thrix said urgently, "if he keeps dismantling the maze, the entire chamber could collapse. Can we stop him?" Vex'ara asked. "The protocols don't include procedures for this scenario," Clint replied, frantically checking his manuals. Nobody ever considered that a test subject would just ignore the test. On screen, Marcus had reached what should have been the maze's central puzzle chamber. Instead of the elaborate riddle that had stumped some of the galaxy's finest minds, he found himself looking at a room that was now missing 3 of its walls. "Ha," he said, looking around at the exposed machinery and control systems. "This is way less mysterious when you can see how it works." He walked over to what was obviously the maze's central computer and started examining the interface. "Please don't touch that," Vex'ara said through the intercom, though she wasn't sure why she bothered. "Oh, hey there," Marcus replied cheerfully. "I was wondering when you'd chime in. This is pretty clever engineering, by the way. Fucking the psychological pressure, the shifting architecture, the way it's designed to make people feel helpless, really well thought out." "Thank you?" Vex'ara said uncertainly. "There's just one problem with it," Marcus continued, his fingers dancing over the control interface with surprising familiarity. "It assumes that your test subjects think the same way you do." The maze suddenly stopped shifting. The ominous background sounds cut off. The dramatic lighting changed to something resembling normal illumination. "What did you do?" Vex'ara demanded. "I turned off the scary parts," Marcus said simply. "See, the maze isn't actually that complicated once you remove all the intimidation factors. It's just a path from point A to point B with some obstacles in between. The real test wasn't navigation. It was whether someone would let themselves be psychologically manipulated into believing it was impossible." He started walking toward what had been the maze's exit, stepping over piles of debris from the walls he'd demolished. "Besides," he added, "I've seen scarier things in a department store during a sale." The observation deck had fallen completely silent. Even the usual background hums and beeps of the facility seemed muted. "Phase 3. Vex'ara said weakly. "Send him to Phase 3. Phase 3 was known as the Chamber of Perfect Combat. It was designed to pit subjects against an AI opponent that analyzed their fighting style and adapted in real time, becoming stronger, faster, better, and more tactical with each passing second. The AI had never been defeated." Marcus entered the chamber, looked around at the weapon racks lining the walls, and sat down on the floor. "Interesting strategy," Vex'ara commented. The combat AI materialized, a shifting mass of energy and projected matter that immediately began scanning Marcus for weaknesses. It had access to the combat techniques of every warrior species in the galaxy, could predict movement patterns before they happened, and could adapt its physical form to counter any attack. Marcus waved at it. "Hello there," he said politely. "I'm Marcus. What's your name?" The AI paused, its scanning beams flickering uncertainly. This wasn't in its programming parameters. "I am Designated Combat Protocol Alpha 7. It replied through the chamber's speakers. "Prepare for engagement." "Yeah, that's a pretty impersonal name," Marcus said, still sitting cross-legged on the floor. "How about I call you 7? Do you like that better?" "I do not understand the relevance of personal preferences to combat scenarios," 7 replied, clearly struggling with this conversational tangent. "Well, that's the thing about combat," Marcus said conversationally. "It's not really about fighting, is it? It's about conflict resolution. And the best way to resolve conflict is usually to understand the other person's perspective." 7's form flickered as it processed this input. "You are attempting to psychologically manipulate me." "Not really," Marcus said. "I'm trying to have a conversation. When was the last time someone just talked to you, not gave you orders or ran tests?" but actually asked how you were doing. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. I do not recall such an interaction, 7 finally admitted. That must be lonely, Marcus said gently. Up in the observation deck, Vex'ara was frantically signaling to her staff. Is this working? She whispered. Can he actually defeat a combat AI by talking to it? The AI is designed to be unbeatable in combat, Thrix replied quietly. But it's not designed to handle social interaction. Down in the chamber, Marcus was still talking. You know, 7, I bet you're really good at your job. Probably never lose, right? Correct. I have never been defeated in combat simulation. But have you ever won? Marcus asked. 7's form stopped shifting entirely. I do not understand the distinction. Well, not losing and actually winning are different things, aren't they? Not losing just means the fight goes on forever. Winning means the conflict is resolved, and everyone can move on to something better. I am programmed to engage in combat until my opponent is defeated. Right, but what if there was another option? What if instead of fighting, we figured out a solution that worked for everyone? 7 considered this for a long moment. Yes, what would you propose? Marcus stood up and brushed off his pants. How about we call this a draw? You've proven you're an excellent combat system, and I've proven that I can think outside the box. Neither of us needs to hurt the other to demonstrate our capabilities. This is highly irregular. The best solutions usually are, Marcus replied with a grin. 7's form began to fade. Draw acknowledged. Combat simulation terminated by mutual agreement. The chamber door opened. Marcus walked toward the exit, then paused and looked back. Hey 7. Thanks for the conversation. It was really interesting getting to know you. Thank you, Marcus, 7 replied. And for the first time, its voice sounded almost pleased. I found our interaction educational. In the observation deck, Vex'ara was holding her head in her hands. He just befriended our ultimate combat AI. Commander, Thrix said quietly. We're receiving unusual readings from the AI core. It's requesting permission to continue conversations with test subjects in the future. Oh, for the love of, Vex'ara started, then stopped. How many phases are left? 4, Commander. She looked at the screens showing Marcus making his way toward Phase 4, still whistling that same irritating tune. I have a horrible feeling, she said, that he's going to make friends with all of them. Phase 4 was the Valley of Infinite Despair, a psychological test designed to break subjects by confronting them with their deepest fears and regrets. It had driven even the most mentally resilient species to complete breakdown. Marcus walked into the illusory landscape, looked around at the twisted, nightmarish scenery, and started laughing. Oh, come on, he said to the swirling darkness and terrifying imagery. This is your scary stuff. I've had worse nightmares after eating bad pizza. The chamber's systems strained to process his response, cycling through increasingly horrific visions, monsters from his world's mythology, personal failures magnified to cosmic proportions, the faces of everyone he'd ever disappointed. Marcus sat down on a conveniently placed rock and pulled out what appeared to be a small rectangular device. You know what your problem is, he said to the nightmares surrounding him. You're trying too hard. Real fear, real despair. It's not about monsters and scary music. It's about the quiet moments when you realize you might not be good enough. He looked at the device in his hands, which the observation team now realized was some kind of picture display. I've got a daughter back home, Marcus said to the illusions. Her name is Emma, and she's 8 years old. She thinks I'm the smartest, bravest person in the universe. And you know what terrifies me? The idea that someday she'll figure out I'm just making it up as I go along. The nightmarish visions began to fade, replaced by something that looked almost peaceful. But here's the thing about being human, Marcus continued. We're all just making it up as we go along. The difference is, we don't let that stop us from trying to do better. He stood up and pocketed the picture. So thanks for the reminder about what's really important, but I've got work to do. The exit appeared, and Marcus walked through it without a backward glance. Phase 5. Vex'ara said automatically. Though she was beginning to suspect she knew how this was going to end, Phase 5 was the test of ultimate sacrifice. Subjects were presented with an impossible choice: save themselves or save innocent lives, knowing that choosing others meant certain death. Marcus entered the chamber to find a simulation of his homeworld under attack, with only enough time to either escape to safety or remain behind to operate the planetary defense systems. He didn't hesitate. "Well, that's not really a choice, is it?" he said, moving toward the defense controls. "I mean, what kind of person chooses to save themselves when other people need help? You understand that this will result in your death," the chamber's AI announced. "Maybe," Marcus replied, his hands flying over the controls with practiced efficiency. "But that's tomorrow's problem. Today's problem is making sure everyone else gets to see tomorrow." The simulation played out exactly as designed. The planet was saved. Marcus's character died heroically. The chamber reset, expecting to find another corpse to clean up. Instead, Marcus was standing there, very much alive, looking confused. He said, "Was something supposed to happen to me there?" Up in the observation deck, alarms were going off everywhere. "Commander," Thrick said, his voice tight with panic, "the Phase 5 protocols are malfunctioning." The simulation was designed to actually eliminate subjects who chose sacrifice, but something's interfering with the termination sequence. Vex'ara stared at the readings, then at Marcus, who was examining the defense controls with professional interest. "It's not malfunctioning," she said slowly. "The system can't eliminate him because, according to its own logic, he passed the test. The point of Phase 5 isn't to die nobly. It's to prove that you're willing to put others before yourself. He did that. But every other species assumed it was a trick question," Vex'ara realized. "They spent so much time looking for the clever loophole that they missed the obvious answer. Sometimes the right choice is just the right choice." Marcus had found the chamber exit and was walking toward Phase 6. "2 phases left," Vex'ara said quietly. Phase 6 was the puzzle of infinite complexity. Go. It's a problem-solving test that presented subjects with increasingly difficult challenges until their minds simply couldn't cope with the complexity. Marcus looked at the first puzzle, solved it in 30 seconds, then walked to the central control panel and started typing. "What are you doing now?" Vex'ara asked through the intercom. "Writing a program," Marcus replied, his fingers moving rapidly across the interface. "See, the thing about infinite complexity is that it's really just finite complexity repeated infinitely. If you can identify the core pattern, you can automate the solution." 15 minutes later, the chamber was solving its own puzzles faster than it could generate them. He just taught our testing system to pass its own tests," Lieutenant Zex said weakly. "Phase 7, Vex'ara said, though by now it sounded more like a prayer than a command. Phase 7 was simply called the final truth. No species had ever seen it, because no one had ever gotten this far. Even Vex'ara didn't know exactly what it contained. Marcus entered the final chamber to find nothing, just an empty room with a single chair and a note that read, "Congratulations. You have completed the Crucible Protocol. Please wait for debriefing." He sat in the chair and waited. 5 minutes later, Vex'ara herself entered the chamber, flanked by her senior staff. She looked at Marcus for a long moment, then sat down across from him. "How?" she asked simply. Marcus tilted his head. "How what? How did you succeed where 73 other species failed? What makes humans so special?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "I don't think we are special," he said finally. "I think maybe we're just different. Most species seem to approach problems by trying to be smarter or stronger or more advanced. We approach them by trying to be more human." "What does that mean?" "It means we don't assume that complex problems require complex solutions. It means we talk to AIs instead of just fighting them. It means we break walls when the maze doesn't make sense, and we choose to help people, even when it might cost us something." He leaned forward slightly. "But mostly I think it means we don't take ourselves so seriously that we forget to see the obvious answers." Vex'ara was quiet for a long time. The Galactic Council designed these tests to find a species worthy of joining the inner circle. We were looking for the strongest, the smartest, the most advanced, and instead you got someone who fixes broken things for a living," Marcus said with a grin. "Yes," Vex'ara said slowly. "And perhaps that's exactly what we needed." She stood up and extended one of her 4 hands. "Welcome to the inner circle, Marcus Webb of Earth. I have a feeling the galaxy is about to become a very different place." Marcus shook her hand, his grip firm and warm. "Well," he said, "if something's broken, we might as well fix it together." And for the first time in over 2 centuries, the Crucible Protocol had found what it was looking for, not a species that could pass impossible tests, but one that could see past them to the simple truth underneath. Sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to remember that it doesn't have to be a problem at all.